Welcome to part 2 of this DCS tutorial. Here we will be covering all of the main Russian air defences and saying how we can most easily defeat them. Then I will show how we might attack a defence in depth. When describing each site, I've also given some information on the likely point defences which might be used alongside that site. However, that information is based on my research and what I would do as a mission designer and nothing more. I'm going to break down the air defences into three basic types. First are the static strategic sites, which are permanently or semi-permanently situated. Then there are the self-propelled medium-range weapons. And finally, tactical point defence systems, which are often mobile but are sometimes also fixed. The first strategic SAM we're going to look at is the SA2 guideline. This is a 50s era system and consists of a P19 flat face search radar, the S75 fan song tracking radar, and the SA2 guideline missile itself, with one missile per launcher. The maximum range of the SA2 is 28 miles, but against the Harrier it's closer to 21 miles, and only 19 miles if there is no search radar. The minimum range is 5 miles, and the ceiling is 82,000 feet, whilst the minimum safe altitude is 500 feet. That is the altitude at which the tracking radar cannot get a lock below that altitude at any range. To completely disable a site, you need to eliminate the tracking radar. If you eliminate the search radar, the tracking radar can pick up a lock, but only within a narrow 20-degree arc, so you're safe as long as you don't fly straight in front of it. The sidearm is probably the best weapon to take out an SA2 for a medium to high altitude, so long as there's no other radars nearby which the sidearm might lock onto. JDAMs will also be highly effective, and with the 5 mile and 500 feet safe zones, you can probably use Maverick rockets or even dumb bombs without much issue. Next up is the SA3 Goa. This is a slightly newer 60s era system, but it has an identical P19 flat face search radar. But this uses an S125 low blow tracking radar, and the S3 launchers have 4 missiles each. The maximum range is 14 miles, but closer to 10 miles against a fighter-sized target like the Harrier. The minimum engagement range is only 2.4 miles, whilst the ceiling is 36,000 feet and a safe altitude of again 500 feet. Just like the SA2, we need to destroy the tracking radar to disable the site. And again, the tracking radar can detect targets within a narrow 20-degree arc if the search radar is destroyed. We could attack an SA3 site in exactly the same manner as an SA2, however a Maverick is preferable, as we should be able to get a lock from up to 12 miles and stay outside of the range of the SA3 whilst ensuring we hit the tracking radar, which we can't guarantee with the sidearm. Up next is the massive SA5 Gammon. This uses the ST68 tin shield radar and is coupled with a square per tracking radar, and the SA5 Gammon launchers each have a single missile. The maximum range of the SA5 is almost 100 miles, however it can't get a lock on such a small aircraft like the Harrier until around 60 miles. The minimum engagement range is also large at 9 miles. The ceiling is unknown, but beyond what any aircraft is capable of in-game, and the minimum safe altitude is 800 feet, so it's very easy to fly underneath. So whilst the SA5 isn't much of a threat to our aircraft, it is, however, tactically and strategically very important, as it denies access to a huge area of airspace, forcing everything down to low level. Destroying the search or tracking radar will render the site inoperable. Clearly, we can't outrange the SA5 with sidearm, but we could still use it out to just over 15 miles at around 800 feet, but it's far from guaranteed to hit, so ideally we're close to under 9 miles inside its minimum range, climb up and employ laser or IR Mavericks. If covered by multiple layers of defence and you have to stay low, then JDAMs or even APKWS could be used. And a quick note for Hornet and Viper pilots, harm can outrange SA5s just about. Finally, we have the SA10, which can be used as a mobile unit in real life, but it's not mobile in game. I have covered this in the previous video, but let's go over it once again. There are 5 components: the C2 command center, the Big Bird long range search radar, the clamshell low altitude search radar, the flap lid tracking radar, and the transporter erector launchers, each with 4 missiles. You only need one of the 2 search radars for the site to operate, but they do complement each other. The Big Bird has a maximum detection range of 87 miles, but cannot detect very low level targets under 300 feet. The clamshell has a shorter range of about 32 miles and can detect the Harrier at about 27 miles, but it can detect targets at 80 feet or less. The maximum engagement range of the SA10 is 40 miles, but against the Harrier it's around 33, and the minimum engagement range is around 3 miles. The ceiling is 150,000 feet, and the minimum safe altitude, as we mentioned earlier, is 80 feet with the clamshell and 300 feet with the Big Bird. Additionally, the SA10 can track multiple targets, including sidearm, making this one of the most difficult SAMs to attack. Eliminating the command center or the tracking radar will render the site inoperable. However, the command center doesn't emit radar, and the tracking radar only emits when a missile is en route. So sidearm will usually hit the search radars or any point defense missile systems which happen to be present, such as the SA-15. If sidearm is used, then the Big Bird search radar is most likely to be hit, leaving just the clamshell search radar. The site will still be operable, but very limited and very vulnerable, as the clamshell cannot track targets above 11,000 feet, and its range is also reduced. If the clamshell radar is destroyed, then the impact is less. The site will still be operable at long range, but won't be able to track very low level targets at under 300 feet, so follow-up attacks become a lot easier. In my previous video I showed how to attack with sidearm at medium and long range, but that usually needs 4 missiles. However, if you launch sidearm inside of 9 miles, then it will reach minimum engagement zone before it can be intercepted. If sidearm is fired at 100 feet from 8 to 9 miles, it will hit the ground before the target. So to prevent this, you need to pitch up 2 to 3 degrees before you select the missile. Then once you've pitched up, select the missile and fire immediately before it's got time to get a lock. If you're wondering why the hell you don't want to lock, then please watch my previous video which explains the reason. Mavericks could be used, but you probably won't get a good lock from 100 feet until you're 5 miles out. And even then, if there are trees, buildings, other vehicles, etc., locking the correct target will be hard for IR Mavs, and keeping a laser track will be hard for laser Mavs. The best solution is to properly use JDAMs. You can even take out the command center and all 3 radars in a single pass by allocating the target using the T-pod. You can then run in and from 4 miles out, pitch up 5 to 10 degrees and loft all 4 bombs and be back down safely at 100 feet before any SAM can get a track. Of course, if you're confident that there is no point defences such as TORs or Tunguskas, then once you're inside of 3 miles, then you could pitch up, use laser guided rockets, bombs or whatever. Let's now take a look at the self-propelled medium range SAMs. These can of course be used in static locations, however they are typically based on track chassis and are designed to protect large formations of mobile ground units from air attack, so are equally mobile. First up is the SA6 Gainful, which is a late 60s design. It comprises the straight flush, surge and tracking radar mounted together on a track chassis. The SA6 missiles themselves are also on a track chassis with 3 missiles per vehicle. The maximum range is 19 miles but about 18 against the Harrier, while the minimum engagement range seems to be about 4 miles. I have seen claims of half a mile online, but I find that you don't get any track at all under 2.3 miles, so I dispute those claims. The ceiling is around 26,000 feet, whilst the safe altitude is around 100 feet. Sidearm's probably the best tool for an SA6, as an SA6 cannot intercept it, and sidearm just about outranges it even at low altitude. Additionally, an SA6 is unlikely to have a radar guided point defense system, but it is likely to be protected by manpads or light AAA. Despite being quite an old design, it can still track targets as low as 100 feet, so you're going to face the same problems with Mavericks unless you get really close, at which point you can start to think about JDAMs, iron bombs or laser guided rockets. But the easiest solution is to get above the 33,000 ceiling and drop some laser guided bombs or JDAMs. Next up is the infamous SA-11 Buck, which was used to bring down Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 over Ukraine in 2014. The SA-11 comprises a command centre, the Snowdrift search radar mounted on a track chassis, are the Fire Dome tracking radar and launchers, which is also on a track chassis with 4 missiles. Destroying the command centre will stop the other components communicating with each other, and each will become isolated, whilst destroying the search radar will prevent a 360-degree detection. However, each individual Fire Dome launch vehicle will still remain a potent threat due to its tracking radar being able to detect within that 120-degree cone. So, 3 vehicles can still provide full coverage.
Caution.
Potentially even more dangerous is a single vehicle whose arc you could easily cross at close range without any detection whatsoever. So you could easily fly straight over one, and the first you'd know is when you get a track at point blank range from behind. Attacking an SA-11 site can be complex. You can take out its search radar with sidearm, and once destroyed, the fire domes are sitting ducks if you stay outside of that arc. However, if you don't know the location, then you need to be very careful. You could try flying at 1 to 2,000 feet and see if you can provoke a track, and then home in on that tracking radar using Mavericks to try and take them out. Obviously making sure that you remain low enough to hide when necessary. Before we move on to the point defence systems, let's talk about placement. All the systems mentioned thus far have the various components in a single site, but they could just as easily be spread out over tens of miles. As a mission designer, I would try and imitate real life as much as possible, and sites such as the SA2, SA3 and SA5 are usually immobile, the locations known, and usually co-located. The SA6 and SA11, however, are designed to be mobile, so their precise locations are generally unknown, even if it's known that they are operating in a given area. The SA-10 can fit into either camp, as it's used both strategically in fixed sites, but can be moved in minutes as well. For sites whose precise location is unknown, this can make things far more dangerous. For example, the SA-6 will appear on radar 1 receiver at over 30 miles, but the launch vehicles might be 20 miles closer, so you could find the missile is coming from a different direction and much sooner than expected. Let's finally look at point defence threats. These tend to have a relatively short range and either operate to provide short range cover to a specific target or ground unit, but they can also be paired with other air defences to give defence in depth, for example to prevent aircraft closing inside minimum ranges and then being free to loiter. You should also note that almost all of the point defence systems are not only mobile but can also fire whilst on the move, while systems like the SA-6, 10 and 11 are mobile but can't fire whilst on the move. So these systems are ideal for supporting convoys in transit. The first of these is the SA-15 Gauntlet. It's mounted on a track chassis with search and tracking radar and 8 missiles all on a single vehicle. Its maximum range is 7 miles and the minimum range is only 1 mile, whilst the maximum altitude is 26,000 feet and the minimum safe altitude is only 30 feet. Whilst its range is limited, it can intercept the sidearm and also Maverick, but it can only track a single target. So as a standalone unit, it can usually be defeated by a pair of sidearms or Mavericks, or by high altitude bombing. The SA-15 comes into its own though when paired with a longer range system such as SA-10 or SA-11, which removes most of the attack options for each. This is the SA-8, and like the SA-15 comes with integrated search and tracking radars along with 6 SA-8 missiles. The range is almost 8 miles with a minimum engagement of around 1.4 miles. The ceiling is 21,000 and the minimum safe altitude is around 50 feet. This system can't intercept sidearm or Maverick, and with a fairly low ceiling it should be easy to take out with laser guided bombs or JDAMs. But once again it does provide overlapping cover with some longer range systems. These are the SA-9 and SA-13, each of which carry 4 infrared homing missiles and as such will not be detected by the radar warning receiver. So your only warning is if you see the smoke trail coming from the missiles. If seen, then your flares are highly effective against both of these systems. The maximum range is 2.5 and 2.8 miles respectively, with half a mile minimum range for both. The ceiling is 12,000 and 15,000 respectively, whilst the minimum altitude is around 30 feet, but a hit at that altitude is pretty unlikely. With their limited range, they can be engaged with pretty much any weapon except for sidearm, of course. However, if unseen, they will be a nasty surprise. Up next is the S-19 Grison, or Tunguska as most people call it. This has 8 missiles and also comes with a pair of 30mm cannon. The maximum range is 4 miles with a ceiling of 16,000 feet, but with the gun there is no minimum range or altitude and it can engage ground units. Its missiles are SAC-LOS, which is semi-automatic command line of sight, and so are not radar guided, they're optically guided. However, it does carry a search radar used for finding targets and range finding, so you will not get a launch tone, but it can be attacked with sidearm. As an isolated unit, any other weapon in the Harrier's arsenal can also be used, with the exception maybe of retarded bombs, as the gun is likely to get a point blank kill. The last of the SAM systems are of course the manpads. Here we have the SA-18 and the slightly newer SA-24. Both have a range of 2.5 miles and a ceiling of 12,000 feet, with virtually zero minimum range or altitude. These can operate alone, but become much more effective when teamed with a commander. This is the ZSU-23-4 Shilka and has been the bane of simulator attack pilots since the days of gunship back in 1986. It carries quad 23mm cannon, which is tied to a fire control radar, which in real life can detect targets up to 10 miles and track them at around 6 miles. However, in-game it seems to operate as just a tracking radar limited to about 1.5 miles, and with a gun range at about 0.8 miles, you have very little warning of an attack, which can reach up to 6,500 feet. Last but one is the Zu-57-2. This is optically guided and has a fairly slow rate of fire, meaning it's not a huge threat. However, its twin 57mm cannon can reach out to 2 miles and up to 14,000 feet, so it could catch you off guard. Last of all, we have the Zu-23, which is a twin 23mm optically guided cannon with the same reach as the Shilka at 2.5 miles and 6,500 feet. This can be mounted in the emplacement or like here on the back of a vehicle. So that's all of your defences out of the way, and in terms of attacking them, you've probably noticed that I often listed JDAM as one of the preferred options unless you can use sidearm, and that's probably not an obvious choice. So I'm going to show how we can attack a target which has in-depth protection and why JDAM is such an effective tool. Here is the same SA-10 sight which I used in my previous video covering long-range attacks with sidearm. However, this is now bolstered with 5 SA-15s, which virtually guarantees protection from sidearm unless at very close range. We also have a pair of Tunguskas, which have a very fast acquire time, and a couple of man-pads for good measure, so it's probably as well defended a target as you're ever likely to see. I'm going to start by attacking with JDAM with the aim of eliminating the SA-10 sight, and then try again with both IR and laser Mavericks, which are probably the obvious choice to see why in reality they aren't such a great option against such a difficult target. Back on board at last, and we shall start at 40 to 45 miles out by finding the targets and allocating each to a JDAM. I'm not going to go through the procedure in detail as I've covered that in the advanced JDAM tutorial already, but as you can see, I'm selecting the 4 key targets for the site, which are all 3 radars and the command centre. But I could continue and allocate the SA-15s as well, as I can carry up to 10 JDAMs. I've done the flap lid and the command centre already, and now it's the big bird. And finally the clamshell. Now that we have the targets marked, we can descend to ground level, and whilst doing so we can arm our weapons and allocate those 4 targets to our JDAMs using the ODU. I'm now at ground level and I've closed to 11 miles. Thus far I've been able to stay relatively high at around 150 feet due to terrain masking and avoiding going over the tops of hills. We're now just waiting on the ranging reticule to appear, and just before we get to maximum range we'll pitch up to around 7 degrees, which will increase the range of the bomb and hopefully take us to at least 30 on the reticule for the first release. We could pitch up more from further away, but this will expose us longer to the SA-10 and SA-15. And if we pitch up less, then we would have to get a little bit closer and be in more danger from the Tunguska and the man-pads. Pitch up, pickle and hold, and start popping chaff and flares as we break away until we're back down to a safe altitude. Shack 1 SA-10 battery, and what remains can simply be bypassed, overflown or destroyed by other assets.
Pull up, pull up.
Let's try that again with the IR Mav, which I do love to use, but just not here. I'm well in range, but at this altitude I can't see the target yet, and the Maverick Seeker isn't good enough for targets which are in such close proximity. I did manage to lock the flap lid then, but accidentally moved it, and then through cack-handedness and rushing, moved the TDC too much, but found the clamshell. Then tried the flap lid again, which I thought I locked, but it was actually one of the tells. I did okay to get 2 missiles away, but I've not eliminated the site as a threat, and I was exposed to danger for 22 seconds, which is 2 seconds longer than with the JDAM. So in this situation, MAV IRs expose us to more risk, are harder to use, and are less effective. This time we're going to try the Laser Maverick. First of all, we're only going to be able to hit a single target in a pass, which is okay as either the flap lid or the command center will do the job. But getting even a single hit is quite difficult. In this first pass, we're going to run in at very low altitude and see what happens. We have a laser track at 5.5 miles, which is great. Slight loft and rifle, and then we're going to stay down at low level. As you can see, it's pretty difficult to maintain a lock due to the ground clutter. And we've impacted the berm.
Pull up. Altitude.
Let's have one final attempt as before, but this time we'll climb up a little bit so we can more easily acquire the target. Rifle. And we have a good clean point track. And shack. Already we've been exposed for 22 seconds. And that's over 30 seconds in total. But at least we killed the target and survived. When I say survived, that's 2 SA-19s after me. An SA-15. 2 more SA-19s. And some 30mm AAA. This is one of the last 2 missiles which was fired from the Tunguska. And it's a minor miracle that I survived. Once again, thank you for watching. I hope that you found this tutorial useful, and if so, please do hit like and subscribe to my channel. In the meantime, I'm going looking for a role in the new Top Gun movie by practicing going inverted.
Power. Check gear.